You
3 hours
have to
after
listen.
my father's
My
funeral,
husband was
I
here.
found his
I
appointment
don't know
book
who
under
you're
the red
talking
leather
about.
barber chair.
This is just a
I had gone back to
barbershop.
Blue Hour Barbershop only to lock the place, collect the lease papers, and leave before the smell of my father's aftershave broke me in half. Outside, Parkdale was turning blue with winter evening. Snow gathered along the curb in dirty ridges. The neon sign above the window flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale glow over the empty sidewalk. Inside, everything looked exactly as he had left it. The broom leaned against the wall. The small radio sat on the shelf, silent for the first time in years. A white towel still hung over the back of the chair, folded with the same careful hands that had buttoned my coat when we arrived in Canada in 1996 with 2 suitcases and no proper English. My father, Amir Markovich, had cut hair in that shop for 22 years. To me it had always seemed like a small life. Too small, too quiet, too willing to bow its head. I was 38 now, an ER nurse who knew how to move fast, speak clearly, and not let emotion slow her hands. My father had been the opposite. He listened more than he spoke. He apologized when other people stepped on him. He kept old receipts in envelopes and sharpened pencils with a knife. That night, I only wanted to find the folder for the landlord. I pulled open the drawer beneath the counter. Nothing. I checked the cabinet beside the sink. Nothing. Then my foot hit something under the red chair. I bent down and saw a black appointment book wedged behind the metal base, wrapped in a barber cape and tied with blue string. My name was written on the cover in my father's handwriting. Not Lena. Not sweetheart. My full name. Lena Markovich. My fingers went cold before I opened it. The early pages were normal. Haircuts, beard trims, old men with Tuesday routines. Then near the back the writing changed. The final page had only one appointment. Lena Markovich. 8:45 p.m. tomorrow. Do not miss this. I stared at the date until the numbers blurred. My father had been buried that morning. Then I turned the book over and saw a sentence written in Bosnian so small I almost missed it. Fayam. Gone, start with the names after midnight. I did not go home that night. I sat behind the counter at Blue Hour Barbershop with my coat still on. The appointment book opened beneath the yellow desk lamp, while the city outside turned quiet under a thin sheet of snow. The last sentence kept pulling my eyes back to it. If I am gone, start with the names after midnight. My father had never written like that. He was a man of grocery lists, rent receipts and birthday cards signed with careful block letters. He did not leave riddles. He did not create drama. He folded his fears into silence and carried them until his shoulders looked permanently tired. At 12:03, I turned to the first page after midnight. The handwriting changed there. No haircuts. No beard trims. No prices. Just names, times, and short notes written so tightly, they looked like they had been pressed into the paper. Rosa Mendoza. Passport missing. 8:45. Naveed Rahman. Basement room. 9:20 Marisol Vega. Cash envelope. 10:05. Anna Petrenko. Blue van. 10:40. Besides several names, the same 2 initials appeared again and again. VK. I read them until my mouth went dry. My father had closed the shop at 7 every night. At least that was what he told us. But I remembered him coming home long after 11, smelling of cold air and coffee, his hands scrubbed clean, his eyes too awake. When I was a teenager, I thought he was avoiding us. When I became an adult, I thought he was simply stubborn, the kind of immigrant father who worked because rest felt unsafe. Now I was not sure I had ever known where he went after closing. I called my mother. Amira answered on the 4th ring, her voice weak from the long funeral day. I asked her about the late appointments. For a moment there was only breathing. Then she said, "Your father made me promise never to ask." The words landed harder than any explanation. I was still holding the phone when 3 knocks struck the front glass. Slow. Careful. Not like a customer. I looked at the clock above the mirror. 8:45 in the evening. A woman stood outside in the snow, clutching a plastic grocery bag against her chest. When I opened the door, she looked past me into the shop and whispered I had an appointment with Amir. For a moment I thought grief had made me hear wrong. The woman on the sidewalk was small, maybe in her mid-40s, with wet snow caught in her dark hair and a plastic grocery bag pressed so tightly to her chest that her fingers had gone pale. She looked at the barber chair behind me, then at the appointment book on the counter, and her face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. I stepped aside and let her in. The bell above the door gave one tired ring. She wiped her boots on the mat as if my father might still scold her for bringing slush onto the floor. "My name is Rosa Mendoza," she said. "Your father told me to come tonight." I closed the door and turned the lock. "My father died yesterday morning," I said. "We buried him today." Rosa did not cry right away. She just lowered herself into the red chair, as if her knees had forgotten how to hold her. Then she whispered, No, he promised he would help me get it back." "Get what back?" I asked. She opened the plastic bag and took out a folded work schedule, a rent receipt, and a photograph of a passport. Not the passport itself. Just a photograph. "My passport," she said. "Dario has it." The name struck the air between us like a match. "Dario who?" She looked at me carefully, as if deciding whether I was safe. "Dario Kovac. Immigration consultant. He says I owe him more money. He says if I complain my file disappears." I felt my father's appointment book heavy in my hand. VK. The initials were no longer ink. They had a face. Rosa told me she cleaned offices downtown at night and sent money to her 2 children in Mexico. She had come to Canada legally, but one missing document had become a chain around her life. Dario had promised to fix it, then kept asking for cash. When she could not pay, he kept her passport. My father found her crying outside a bakery after midnight and brought her here. He made tea. He wrote her name in the book. He told her to come back tonight. Rosa reached into the bag again and placed a photograph on the counter. In it, my father stood outside Blue Hour with a dozen immigrants, all smiling like people who had just survived something. On the back, he had written "the ones who made it out." I looked closer. At the far edge of the picture stood a man in a black coat.
Here is the proof.
He was smiling behind my father's shoulder. I had seen him that morning at the funeral. I knew the man in the black coat before Rosa said his name again. Dario Kovac had stood near my mother at the cemetery that morning, holding an umbrella over her shoulder like a grieving friend. He had called my father a good man. He had pressed both of my hands between his and told me, "Lena, your father carried too much. Now you must make practical choices." At the time I thought he meant the shop, the bills, the old lease on Queen Street West. Now I remembered the way his eyes had moved across Blue Hour when he came by after the service. Not sad. Measuring. He had even said he knew a buyer who could take the place quickly, before taxes and maintenance became a burden. Rosa sat in the red chair, watching my face as the memory settled. "He wants this shop gone," I said. She nodded once. "Your father kept things here." I asked what things, but Rosa only looked at the mirrors, the cracked leather, the locked cabinet beside the sink. She was scared of the walls hearing her. The next morning I drove to Dario's office on Dundas Street West with the appointment book hidden inside my hospital tote. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Rosa. I told myself I only wanted to see his face when he lied. His office was above a tax service, with a Canadian flag in the window and framed photos of smiling families on the wall. New citizens. New workers. New lives. In the waiting room, a Filipino man held a folder so tightly the paper bent in his hands. A young woman in a winter coat stared at the floor while Dario's assistant whispered that mistakes cost extra. Then Dario opened his office door and saw me. His smile arrived too fast. "Lena," he said, "what a surprise." I said I needed advice for a coworker with immigration paperwork. He invited me in, offered coffee, and spoke in the smooth voice of a man who had practiced kindness until it sounded like a receipt. On his desk sat a small stack of blue appointment cards from my father's shop. My throat tightened, but I kept my hands still. Dario noticed where I was looking. "Your father kept too many old papers," he said softly. "Be careful with memories. They can ruin families." I left without answering. Before I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop opening the book your father should have burned." The message should have frightened me. Instead, it made one thing clear. My father had not been paranoid. Someone was watching the book. I drove straight to Blue Hour barbershop after my shift ended. The appointment book zipped inside my coat where I could feel its hard spine against my ribs. It was almost midnight. The street was empty except for a delivery truck idling near the corner, and a man smoking outside the laundromat. The neon sign above the shop was dark, but the front door was not fully closed.
Your father was building a case.
The lock had been scratched.
Oh,
the frame
God.
had a fresh splinter near the handle. I stood still for a long second listening. No footsteps. No voices. Only the low hum of the streetcar wires outside. Inside, the shop had been searched. Not destroyed. Searched. The drawers were open. The towels had been pulled from the shelves. My father's radio lay on the floor with its back cracked open. The red barber chair had been dragged 3 feet from its usual place, leaving dark marks across the tile. Whoever came in had known exactly what mattered. I stepped around the broken radio and reached for my phone, but before I could call anyone, a voice behind me said, "Do not turn on the light." I froze. Then I recognized him in the mirror. Theo Grant, one of my father's oldest customers, stood in the back doorway wearing a gray wool cap and a winter coat dusted with snow. He was 61, a retired bus driver, the kind of man who always paid in exact bills and never sat until my father told him to. Theo held up a small brass key. "Your father gave me this 3 years ago," he said. "Told me if anything happened I should wait for you here." My mouth went dry. "Anything like what?" Theo looked at the red chair. "He said the chair knew how to talk, but only if you came looking." Together, we moved the chair back to its mark on the floor. Theo pressed 2 fingers beneath the cracked leather cushion and found a metal latch I had never seen. A narrow compartment opened under the seat. Inside were a USB drive, passport copies, cash receipts, photographs, and a small digital recorder wrapped in a towel. My hand shook when I pressed play. My father's voice filled the dark shop. "My name is Amir Markovich. If you are hearing this, Dario has found me." Then the next file appeared on the screen of Theo's old laptop. Its name was Lena 1996 original case. The file with my name on it did not open like a document. It opened like a wound. Theo sat beside me in the dark shop while the old laptop loaded scanned papers from 1996, each one marked with my father's careful notes. Refugee intake forms. Temporary housing records. A receipt for 5,000 Canadian dollars paid in cash. A photocopy of my mother's passport. A photocopy of mine, my 10-year-old face staring out from the screen with frightened eyes, and a crooked haircut my father had given me in a motel bathroom. At the bottom of the receipt was a signature I already knew. Dario Kovac. I read it 3 times before my mind accepted it. Dario had not simply known my family. He had been part of the first door we walked through in Canada. The next audio file began with a click. Then my father's voice, lower than I remembered. "Dario helped us when we did not know the language." Then he kept one paper. One mistake. One thing he could use. There was a pause. I heard my father breathe. "If I speak," he says, "Lena's citizenship can be questioned." I know now this may be a lie. But when your child is 10, fear becomes bigger than the law. I covered my mouth with my hand. Not to cry. To stay quiet enough to keep listening. My whole life, I had mistaken my father's caution for weakness. I had rolled my eyes when he refused to argue with landlords. I had been embarrassed when he smiled too politely at people who treated him like furniture. I had built a clean Canadian life on top of his silence and called it ambition. The file continued. Names appeared on the screen. Men and women from Bosnia, Mexico, the Philippines, Ukraine, Syria, Haiti. Each one tied to Dario. Each one marked by money, missing documents, false fees, or threats. Then my mother's voice came from behind me. I turned. Amira stood in the doorway, wrapped in her black funeral coat. Theo must have called her. She looked smaller than she had that morning. "He made me promise," she said. In 2007, he came home with his face swollen and told me he slipped on ice. But there was no ice that day. She placed a folded note on the counter. "Your father left this in my sewing box." I opened it. One line was underlined twice. "If Dario touches Lena, give everything to Mara Singh." The name Mara Singh was not in my father's appointment book. It was taped beneath the back cover, hidden under a strip of brown paper so old it had turned soft at the edges. Mara Singh, Community Rights Clinic, Spadina Avenue. Under the address, my father had written one sentence in Bosnian. "She knows where the second copy is." By 8 the next morning, I was standing outside a brick office building squeezed between a pharmacy and a noodle shop, holding the USB drive in one hand and the appointment book in the other. My mother waited in Theo's car across the street. She had not slept. Neither had I. Mara Singh was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled into a low knot and the calm eyes of someone who had heard too many frightened people tell the truth too late. When I said Amir Markovich was my father, she did not ask me to sit down. She locked her office door. Then she opened a gray filing cabinet and pulled out a box with my father's name on it. My knees almost gave way. He came to me 11 years ago, she said. At first he brought only one receipt, then one recording, then one name. He never trusted email, never trusted mail. Every few months he came after closing, sat right there and gave me another piece. She pointed to the chair across from her desk. I imagined him there, coat folded on his lap, hat in his hands, carrying other people's fear because they could not carry it alone. Mara opened the box. Inside were copies of the same names from the appointment book, but with addresses, payment dates, phone numbers, and statements. Your father was building a pattern, she said. Dario did not just cheat people. He chose people who were isolated, ashamed, or afraid of losing their place here. That is why the book matters.
You knew about the
Connects the people to the dates. I asked why she had not gone to the police. Mara looked at the USB in my hand. Because Dario would say your father was confused, angry, grieving, or trying to ruin a businessman. We needed the original book. We needed a living witness who would speak now. Rosa, I said. Mara nodded. I called Rosa from Mara's office. No answer. I called again. Nothing. By noon, Theo drove me to Rosa's basement room near Lansdowne. The door was open. Her coat was gone. On the table lay one torn piece of paper. He said your father lied. Outside, a corner store camera showed Rosa stepping into a blue van. The blue van changed everything. Until then, the story had lived in paper, in receipts, in my father's careful handwriting. Now it had a door, a license plate, and Rosa inside it. Mara told me not to chase fear with panic. She made 2 calls, one to a police contact who worked fraud cases, one to a former client named Anna Petrenko. That name was already in the appointment book. Anna, blue van 1040. We found her in Mississauga, above a bakery that smelled of warm bread and winter coats. Anna was Ukrainian, 52, with tired eyes and a voice that shook only when she said my father's name. Amir saved me from that van, she said. Not with fists. With proof. She opened a drawer and took out an old pay stub, a photograph, and an address written on the back of a bus transfer. A cleaning warehouse near the rail yards. Dario used the company to move people from job to job, she said. They were not locked in chains. It was worse. They were locked by debt, shame, missing papers, and the fear that one wrong word would erase everything they had built. By dusk, Theo drove while Mara sat beside him with her phone open and her voice calm. I sat in the back with the appointment book on my knees. I kept seeing my father after closing, sweeping hair from the floor, waiting for people who arrived with grocery bags full of documents and faces full of fear. The warehouse sat behind a row of storage units, its windows gray with dust. A blue van was parked outside. Rosa stood near the side entrance in her thin coat, holding the same plastic bag from the shop. She saw me and looked away, ashamed before she was even safe. Dario came out behind her. No anger. No hurry. Just that polished smile. Lena, he said, your father filled your head with old immigrant paranoia. I stepped forward, close enough to see the Canadian flag pin on his coat. My father kept records, I said. Dario laughed softly. Your father should have stayed a barber. I took out my phone and pressed play. His own voice came through the speaker, clear and smooth, naming fees, passports, and the price of silence. Rosa lifted her head. So did 2 workers by the loading door. Behind me, Mara was already speaking to the police. For the first time, Dario stopped smiling. The police did not arrive like they do in movies. There were no flashing lights tearing through the dark, no dramatic shouting, no sudden justice that could fit inside a single breath. 2 officers came first, then a detective Mara knew, then another car that parked quietly near the loading door. Dario tried to speak over everyone. He said Rosa was confused. He said my father had misunderstood business agreements. He said immigrants often panicked when paperwork became complicated. Mara handed the detective the USB drive. I handed him the appointment book. Rosa handed him her plastic bag. One by one, the workers near the door stepped closer. No one raised their voice. That was what made it feel powerful. Dario had built his life on people staying quiet, and now silence was leaving him. 3 weeks later, Blue Hour Barbershop still smelled like my father's aftershave. The radio was fixed. The red chair had been cleaned but not replaced. Mara called to say Dario was under formal investigation, and more witnesses had come forward after Rosa gave her statement. Some had kept receipts in kitchen drawers for years. Some had hidden photocopies in winter coats. Some had saved my father's appointment cards like small proof that one person had believed them. My mother came with me the first night I reopened the shop. She brought the old kettle from home and placed it on the back counter. Theo swept the floor even though there was nothing to sweep. Rosa arrived with her passport in her hands. She did not wave it like a victory. She just held it against her chest and breathed like someone learning the size of her own lungs again. At 8:45, I opened my father's final envelope. His handwriting was steady. Lena, it said, I could not fix everyone's life. I was only a barber. But after closing, people told the truth because the world was finally quiet. I kept the door open as long as I could. Now you decide what the room becomes. I read it twice. Then I walked outside into the cold Toronto night and looked at the old sign. The blue neon flickered above the sidewalk. I did not sell the shop. I changed only one thing. Under Blue Hour Barbershop, I added a smaller sign in white letters. After closing, Community Help Desk. That night, I sat in the red chair with the appointment book open on my lap. The street was empty. The radio played softly. My mother poured tea into paper cups. At exactly 8:45, someone knocked on the glass. A young man stood outside holding a worn envelope with both hands. I unlocked the door and let the warm light fall across the snow. For the first time since my father died, the shop did not feel empty. It felt ready.